Hi, we're going to be continuing with Jung with dreams, and we're going on from about we're going from page 128, actually 131. So just before I get into more specific material, there's gonna be a bit of editing in this one because I'm gonna try and stop and think about what I'm saying before saying it. The purpose of these videos is to give me a chance to practice articulating myself, which is quite difficult to do, believe it or not. And in one way, I'm not helping myself by making it a study of a text, namely and a complex and difficult text at that, because it asks a lot of a viewer. And maybe what I should do is assume that no one else will see this, which is perfectly reasonable, but also, well, maybe that's what I'll try to do, but it doesn't exactly make it accessible. You know what I mean? So, a couple of things to say. Being able to understand what I'm talking about kind of relies on someone being willing to put in the time and effort to study the dreams text, the part of it, part four, that we're looking into, and doing that by themselves, because that contextualizes what I have to say about it. I guess what I'm hoping here is to reveal what's what's come to me as a result of studying this text. And in 2025, I'm sitting in the context of trying to grapple with the spiritual, religious, and cultural implications of the meta crisis and meaning crisis, and what what are the requirements of modern people, culturally speaking, let's say, in our time of being alive. So, like, we can talk about, ch changes to the way that we live, like, and to the institutions and like that. But I'm talking here about our guiding values, and roughly speaking, and as a very basic framing, like most people, like traditional religions aren't available to a lot of people anymore because it doesn't feel relevant to them. Um, I'm taking from Viveki here, so it's like most people don't find that those traditional solutions, those traditional responses, are adequate, and the modern solutions, namely political identification and absence of that, meaning absence of the guiding sort of meta frameworks that used to structure our lives, meaning anarchism and nihilism, also don't really serve people that well. And between those three, there is an empty space. And what we're hoping and intending is that new new institutions can and must arise to respond to the challenge of our times. But it's not just new institutions, it's also a new sense of the sacred, a new sense of ultimacy that is the substance of religion. And it's by reconnecting ourselves with that, with the sense of what is sacred, or what is ultimate, what is called divine, let's say. It's that which can and must serve as the only viable, mm, source or orienting basis of a time of transition and indeed a new culture. So Nietzsche announced the death of God. God has been dead. part of the premise of this presentation is that God has been reborn, and what the term God refers to, that there is a mystical core to all religions and all cultures, secular and non-secular, and that it's by, yeah, getting in touch with that, um, that we can evoke our sense that God has been reborn. And it involves a certain sort of figure ground reversal shift, like a gestalt shift in terms of how we relate to the void. There's a qualities that have to do with silence, with stillness, with infinite blackness, with empty space, with void-like qualities. These, instead of being the inner emptiness, which is this the structure of the meaning crisis, which is our nihilism, there's a sort of, yeah, figure ground reversal where it becomes a void which is totally full and indeed conscious and indeed who we are, as it turns out. It turns out that we are, in the sense of when you look for the self and don't find it, that empty space is what we find. Now, with Jung, his understanding changed a lot over the course of his lifetime. And in his internal process, in his dialogue within himself, he, like a series of images and indeed dialogues naturally arose for him, in him, through him. And you know, as well as in his engagement with patients, with clients, he described the process of individuation as the developmental changes that go on as a result of the progressive emergence of a new center of consciousness. So where the first half of life is more devoted to the development of one's ego, individuation has to do with the development for Jung. This is in the second half of life, where the self ends up being a sort of higher center of personality, if you like, around which the person can orient themselves after having developed away through individuation from the ego. Over the course of the second half of his career, as he came to more deeply appreciate and engage with alchemy, he realized and began to realize that there is a collective dimension to not only the structure of the unconscious, but also to the process of individuation. Um, that leads us into formulations of a depth sociology as well as a depth psychology, meaning the conditions in which the individual is embedded during the process of their individual development. But it also allows us to speak of the relationship between classically individuation within a person, but it also allows us to understand that the images of the mandala as a symbol of the self, this new emerging center of personality, they have a collective significance as well as a significance to individuals. So th these images, they describe one process, and it's a process that arises within individual development um, at any scale, is what I'm going to say. So it's a scale invariant process. One way of thinking about that is that individuation, properly understood, the emergence of this new center of consciousness is something that occurs, in a sense, beyond time and space. And that can help me to say something like that it's scale invariant, meaning if we consider, like, let's say me, Sam, here, this is what we consider to be a person. We could say an individual. So there could be a um, individuation and its related symbolism could apply to me, Sam, the individual. But if we consider the human species as a superorganism, let's say, as a being, then the symbolism related to individuation can also apply to this being. But it does so obviously at a different scale in space and time, um, such that the phenomena attributable to individuation can be considered independent of space and time. Although it's a bit trickier than that because obviously the historical like the emergence of consciousness in time and space is obviously also important and worth noting. All I mean to say here is that individuation, as Jung came to realize, is not just about the individuation of individual people, although it that is critically important. There's a dynamic in terms of the individuation of individual people and the individuation of the species, and a dialogue between those processes. And so the intention behind this series of videos is not just to articulate my thoughts that have to do with these series of dreams and Jung's commentary on them, but it's my intention is actually to reveal and point to my own or point to a sense of this emergent center in real time. As in by, yeah, so because there's this, let's say between us, between like there's a space that's right here. And the idea is to slowly and with many course corrections become more connected with and indeed intimate with this space. I want to recall again Jung's point that Jung has drawn these dreams from a larger sequence, and he's drawn them because it's his text. He's drawn them because he thinks that these are the ones that are important. Um, and there's something arbitrary about the dreams in the sense that they don't create a coherent narrative in the way that we might want. But each of them has each of the dreams has a sort of point by point connection, like the rays of the sun, if you like, to the the self, to the mandala as the symbol of the self, to the process of individuation that Jung is trying to point to. Um, I think it's important to understand that because it gives a different, we're not trying to create a narrative here. It's about using different symbols, the deepest symbols which are available to us and which are revealed through the dreams, especially the later ones, um, to point to something and understand as well where we're blocked in that pointing.